Kriquette Davis.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kriquette Davis, and I am a loan originator, but I am mostly an advocate for children. I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse and have for many, many, many years advocated on behalf of our children. I'm a trainer for Darkness to Light Stewards of Children, and I am excited to be a part of this panel.
Okay, and Miss Ann Parsons.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to participate. I'm a longtime pediatric nurse practitioner and have been here at Teddy Bear doing medical evaluations since 2007. So I have direct contact with children and families, as well as doing education for community members and medical and other professionals.
Thank you, Miss Parsons. Dr. Wright.
Yeah, hi, I'm John Wright. I'm a professor of pediatrics here at ECU and came up here from South Florida to continue working in the field of child abuse pediatrics. I practiced primary pediatrics in Fort Lauderdale, Florida for 30 years and also directed the child protection team of Broward County for that most of that time. And then I came up here to sunny Eastern North Carolina to join the Teddy Bear. So, and I've been loving it ever since. So we do a lot of work here, serve a lot of counties, and see a lot of children that are engaged in investigations for suspected child abuse. Thank you.
Thank you. And Bonnie Jean.
Good afternoon. I'm Bonnie Jean Kuras, and I'm also a member of the Teddy Bear team. I am one of 3 community educators at Teddy Bear Children's Advocacy Center. And primarily my role is to travel throughout Eastern North Carolina to about 26 different counties, teaching and facilitating the recognition, prevention, and response to child sexual abuse, as well as teaching about adverse childhood experiences and how to mitigate those, and circle of security parenting and resilience techniques. So I get to do all sorts of kinds of things to help educate folks on prevention and the response to child maltreatment. Thanks for having me today.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Bonnie Jean. I forgot to introduce myself, so I'm going to do that. I'm Melinda Sampson. I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator for NC Stop Human Trafficking. We, along with Teddy Bear, are partnering together to present this panel. And we're doing that because the intersection between child abuse and human trafficking is huge. Child abuse often leads to trafficking, but some abuse cases are also trafficking. And I'm going to let the panelists talk about that. I am merely here to moderate today. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with the first question. And anybody who wants to take it can absolutely take it. And we're just going to do a round table for each one. So the first question is, could you tell me about child abuse in your own words from your own background? And whoever wants to take that, by all means, unmute and go for it.
All right, I'll get started. Well, I think that child abuse has really been a subspecialty of mine. So I would hesitate to define it myself. I just go to the experts and let them define it. So because a lot of people may have a definition in their mind of what child abuse is. And I think the public kind of cubbyholes it all into child sexual abuse, which is about 8 or 10% of all child maltreatment. An important part, because all child sexual abuse encompasses a fair amount, a lot of emotional abuse layered in, because that's how the person gains power. And so we categorize child maltreatment as physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and psychological abuse or emotional abuse. I said that already. And also there's medical child abuse and abuse of head injury, or things that are somewhat subcategories. And I also just gave a talk yesterday morning about intrafamilial child torture, which is the most severe, one of the more severe forms of child maltreatment, which needs to be really thought of almost separately. But any individual child who experiences maltreatment from their caregiver may experience a number of different modalities. And each of them, you know, have a legal definition. So it's a little complicated, but children, I think of it as just a really bad life experience because they're in a bad situation, or people are not taking care of their needs and then not meeting their needs. Most of child maltreatment is actually neglect, which means that someone's not doing something to meet their needs. So I think of abuse as an active process that injures a child, and neglect as a failure to act that may injure the child. So those are pretty broad categories, but that's the way I think of it.
I thought I would have no trouble answering that question. And then Melinda gave me the list of questions, and I've been thinking, and as John said, we just spent a couple days doing continuing education about child maltreatment. I think this is a hard question to answer because there are cultural issues, and even depending on where you live in this country, civil, social service definitions and legal criminal definitions are different. John's broad category of an action that harms a child, or a failure to act when you to meet a child's needs, I think is a good one. There are a lot of nuances, and the thing about neglect is, for me, it needs to be a failure to act when you know action is necessary and you're actually able to take that action. So not feeding your children when you know you need to feed your children and you have the resources to feed your children is different than not feeding your children when you know they need to eat, but you don't have the means to feed them. As far as I'm concerned, those two situations would require different interventions. But this was a hard one for me to answer because I think there are a lot of nuances outside prescribed printed definitions.
I'm going to jump in as well and talk about, and I've been in the same trainings that you all have been in as well today. And we've been talking an awful lot about in each state that we look at different ages of consent, specifically when we're talking about child sexual abuse, and that the differences of ages together, age of consent, what does the meaning of maturation have to do with anything? And so each law, each state looks at things a little bit differently as well. And then thinking about power dynamics is another piece that really plays a role in child maltreatment and how child maltreatment is looked at. And I think we also need to look at not just power dynamics between adult and children, but children and children. And that is something that really needs to be considered and thought about more often than not. I'm coming from 30 years in education, as well as a building principal, as a teacher, working with the vulnerable populations of exceptional children and looking at those dynamics as well, because we're also really talking about a power dynamic. And when children treat other children with that power dynamic and treating vulnerable populations. So that's another type of scenario where you can have abuse occur, not just sexual abuse, but also physical abuse at the same time, and whether or not it can then feed into sexual abuse or exploitation is another piece of that I'm thinking that we will probably have a little bit more of a further conversation about. So I want to throw that out there as well. And then I also want to hit upon the fact that now we are in the age of technology, and technology adds another layer for opportunities for child maltreatment, which allows a child to actually open up the doors for themselves to become the perpetrator on themselves. And I'll explain that a little bit more as we go on.
And I'll just add a very little bit because I am a lay person. I did work at the YMCA for over 33 years and saw a lot in my career at the Y. And the one thing that I know is that child abuse is in so many different angles, and a lot of times the general public don't understand that. When you say child abuse, it's a very generalized term. As I have taught stewards to children, and as I have worked in our community, specifically mine is more around sexual abuse because that is the journey I traveled through. People just, that one, they don't want to talk about it, and we'll talk about this again later, but they really are out of touch with this whole thing. And so, when when I'm interacting with folks like you and we're kind of all on the same level, it's like speaking a foreign language sometimes to folks about child abuse, because it means so many different things to people. And then that's one facet. And then the other facet of it, they just don't want to talk about it. And so it's multifaceted, and people wouldn't talk about sexual abuse for such a long time. And they would always say child abuse, child abuse, child abuse. And now I think we're coming around to the point that people understanding that it's so much more, and it's so much deeper than on the surface.
Thank you so much. So that brings me to my next question. Being that we have kind of established child abuse operates in a gray area often, and there's no hard, fast definition from every professional on this panel, which is perfectly correct in my personal opinion too, but I'm not serving on the panel. I'm merely moderating. So what I'm going to ask next is, with that in mind, what are some, I guess, indicators, whether they be physical presentation, emotional reactions of child abuse, not only of when children are going through it, but also, and this isn't in the list of questions, so I'm going to ask you to think on the fly here, but also as adults, because adults typically realize they were victims of abuse after the fact. Does that make sense? So if y'all want to weigh in on that, and again, I'm going to give you the floor, and tell me what you think in your professional opinion.
Well, I'm going to jump in before Bonnie Jean gets started, because once she gets started, she may use up all of the rest of our time. The expression of such an experience is as varied as there are individuals. So any one of us who's been through, if we put all of us who are on this panel in the same situation and the same thing happens to us, we're each going to have an individual response. And that may be a physiologic, physical symptom response. It may be an emotional response. It may be that we just go on about our business as if this didn't bother, whatever it was, didn't bother us at all in the moment. And moving forward, the literature supports, there's decades and decades of literature that supports that just because we think we're moving on and it's not bothering us, that it does, and it can come up, it can come around to bite us, as it were, in many, many ways. Chronic physical illness, mental health issues, attempts to self-medicate with various means, whether it's substances or and I know people who are listening hate that because it feels like it's not helpful. In my day-to-day work with children and families, we run through a list of behaviors that may be normal in kids, may be not so normal in kids, depending on how their age, what their age and developmental level is. But what I'm thinking about when I ask those questions and what I ask families to share with me is, has there been a significant change? And when in time did they notice that change? We often ask, you know, have you noticed any changes in your child's behavior? Has anything been better or anything worse since you learned about what happened to them, or since you discovered what happened to them, or since you came to have investigators in your life? Because the timing of things can be telling. Lo and behold, they weren't sleeping well, they were arguing all the time, and they were hiding in their room. And then when the family learned what happened and the child isn't having any contact with that person anymore, lo and behold, he's willing to eat dinner with the family and will watch a movie every now and then. Or the opposite. They had a sleepover and they came home from that sleepover and they were entirely different. So it just varies from person to person, but the timing of a change in behavior, particularly in young people, can be very telling.
The physical abuse signs that I teach my colleagues in pediatrics and anyone that interacts with children, school teachers, when I was reading every child abuse report in Broward County every day, which was for many years, most of the reports came from school teachers and other people that interacted with children, especially physical abuse that involved the skin, because they would see them. Occasionally, a lot of times they'd bundle them up and try to hide those areas where they were inflicting injuries to the child. But most of the loop marks and all these bad things that we see were not seen by pediatricians. People do not generally beat up their kids really bad and then take them to be examined by their pediatrician. So I always told the pediatricians that you're going to see these injuries. I'll show you slides of, and you'll may never see that in your private practice. On the other hand, pediatricians need to be aware, because we get to examine little babies quite frequently, and there are signs in little babies called sentinel injuries, which I'm constantly out there trying to teach pediatricians to not ignore. So a baby under 4 months should have no bruising anywhere. All right, so any bruising in any baby that's under 5 months, really, because they can't bruise themselves. So that's a good indicator of inflicted injury on the baby. And we call that a sentinel injury because we got to wake up and we should hear blaring horns when we see those injuries. And there's a number of them that have been described. And most babies are, the younger they are, the more if someone is abusing a baby, that's the most lethal time in life. Most of the fatalities occur under 3 years of age. So we do not want to miss that. The pediatrician does not want to ignore that. Family member that notices injuries on a baby, like everyone in North Carolina is a mandated reporter. Like, so if you see bruises or injuries on a baby, pick up the phone and call DSS and law enforcement, or just one. You're supposed to call them both, but you know, you're supposed to by law call them both, but they will inform each other too if you get, you know, so don't hesitate to inform somebody, because that could save the baby's life. And that's really important. So, I mean, other types of maltreatments are more subtle, and you may get a sense, I mean, kids, you know, that are very aggressive or have excessive, what we call tactile defensiveness. Like, you're not supposed to come up and hug a kid unless they're comfortable with it. But if you just put your hand on a child and they just shudder and have a lot of fear, and you can tell that anxiety, then you might suspect that child's like not being treated very well in some setting. So these are the kinds of things that you see. Insomnia. There's a rule that I teach the residents and all the medical people, 10-4 faces P, which we understand these acronyms. We live on acronyms. So 10-4 means torso, ear, neck. Faces is the frenulum of the lip. the angle of the jaw, the conjunctiva or the eye injury, the ear, and P is a pattern injury. So if you see something that looks like an object, it probably the child was hit with an object or burned with an object. So they, anything like that should absolutely prompt a reasonable suspicion that the child's being physically abused. And that person that spots one of those things needs to make the call. And if they have some excuse for it or whatever, then that still needs to be investigated. I mean, there's rare things that can look like child abuse, but with specialists that are going to know what those are. And it's still worthwhile to err on the side of protecting the child. So I talked about the sentinel injuries and the faces. So school-age children may miss a lot of school and may come to school dressed like the winter because they're hiding injuries and stuff like that. And they also, if they're even preschoolers that are being physically abused, they'll be more aggressive. And sometimes they'll actually act out the violence that they've witnessed at home. I had grandparents who were taking care of this little girl, and they got her home after this bad child abuse thing, and she took her normal baby doll that she would normally cuddle and everything, and she was slamming it around and throwing it around and cussing at it. So there are behavior indicia of this bad experience that she had. So you just have to pay attention. And if someone is in that child's life, knows them and is looking out for them, then that will mitigate a lot of these bad experiences that they have experienced. But if there's nobody there that's keeping an eye on them, unfortunately, people that go down the rabbit hole and get worse and worse and worse tend to isolate themselves and tend to not allow the children to be seen publicly. So a child that just sort of disappears off the radar screen is the one I'd worry about. The no-shows in the pediatric office, I always tell the pediatricians, like, watch your no-shows if you want to find child abuse. I mean, I liken it to the dark matter of the universe, which is kind of my nerd brain, but because people that study the universe know that the most of the mass in the universe we can't measure, we can't see. It's called dark matter, and it deflects the pathway of gravitational waves. Don't ask me to explain that anymore, but it is most of the mass of the universe just affects something else. So I think that child abuse is there. It's pretty prevalent. And it affects the trajectory of the child's health throughout their life. So that's the best way I can explain it. We see it by what it causes to the child. Anyway, so that probably didn't help anybody. But I like to think of it that way. The dark matter of pediatrics. Anyway.
I liked it.
Actually, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think that there are a couple of other things to consider and think about as well in terms of what children may be showing, because the signs aren't obvious. Sometimes they look like other things. And so we oftentimes will see children being labeled or being, and again, I'm coming from the educator's perspective in terms of suddenly, as Anne mentioned, a child's behavior is changing and people will start describing them as attention deficit, or hyperactive, or, these types of things. This child's behavior is becoming disruptive in the classroom and they're not learning. And you might see that they are not grasping concepts in the classroom. And well, that's because their brain is completely offline, because they're focused in the fight, flight, freeze, submit. They're just basically surviving in their world at this point in time. And so they've got other things going on. So they may be acting out in the classroom. They may be getting aggressive, as John mentioned, in the classroom. They may be having all of these different types of behaviors. They may be agitated. They may be withdrawn. It could be either, it could be or, it could be a variety of different things like that, where they are feeling absolutely hopeless. And so they are just shutting down. And what's happening is that you're seeing that there becomes a learning gap. They're no longer learning the concepts that they once were grasping quite easily. So you're starting to see that something's happening with the learning process as well. And that's something to consider. A lot of children end up being sent to the pediatrician's office for attention deficit disorder and, being put on medication. Well, one of the questions that could be considered and could be asked is there something else happening in your life at this point in time? Because it might not be something chemically going on in their bodies. It might be something outwardly happening to them. Again, going back to that trauma-informed approach of thinking about what's happening to you versus what's wrong with you. And there are a lot of folks, and I know we have somebody on the call today who I know is who works for ECU Pediatrics, who has that kind of approach that really thinks about the whole child versus just medical intervention that way, or chemical intervention that way overall. You might see children who are angry and disconnected, or just the opposite, suddenly perfectionism, where the child starts acting in a very perfect way. Everything has to be perfect. And if it's not, you might see meltdowns and the inability to regulate their behavior emotionally that way. Thinking about overeating, constantly looking for comfort foods or things like that. I mean, a variety of different things that are completely out of the realm of what we would think of how people would react and respond. And that's something to consider and think about overall. Children who might be acting in a way that is either over their age in terms of chronological age, or under in terms of their developmental age, going backwards in their developmental stages. That's another thing to consider and think about as well, along with those startle reflexes that Anne had mentioned as well. So there's a variety of different things that, each time you see something like that and it seems out of the norm, it's worth saying, I wonder what's going on. It might not always be abuse. It might not always be sexual abuse. It might not always be maltreatment, but it's worth having that trauma-informed lens to look at them with the lens of love and say, what seems to be happening here? Because even if it's not one of those things, it's worth delving a little bit deeper, because it's worth questioning somehow, some way, what's going on with this child.
I just want to piggyback on what you were saying, Bonnie, about the too perfect behavior. And with again, my experience with child abuse, sexual abuse, that was how it presented itself with me, is that, I always wanted to make sure that I had the best grades and that I never got in trouble and never brought unnecessary attention to myself. And as I've talked to other folks that have had the same journey, trying to be at the top of your game just so you can even be in the room with other people. And many times people miss that because they're looking for the child to have some sort of really adverse bad behavior. And so the kids that are being normal, so to speak, or trying to achieve on a high level, those kids are the ones that people don't even think about until it manifests itself in some other way. And so when I talk to groups of people, I try to really reinforce that you're not always looking for bad behavior. You're looking for a behavior change that's out of the ordinary for that child. And to just be thoughtful and intentional about how they were the day before versus how they are now. Because I hear it, well, I'm not at the Y anymore, but I heard it so much more when I was at the Y, and people would automatically, when a child was having problems, it's like, oh, they must be having problems at home or this and that and the other. And then, I would have kids that had been with us for a long time that were, always engaged, but all of a sudden like went up a notch to be, had to be the best of everything and had to make sure everything was all together and those sort of things. And people miss that piece. They miss that piece, in my opinion, way more than they do the adverse actions of the children.
Thank you
Yeah,
so
that's a
much for
really
answering.
important point.
Yes, thank you so much for answering that question so clearly. Now this is going to be one of my favorite questions because I'm sure we can talk about this until the cows come home, but we're not. I'm going to moderate it well, I hope anyway. But I do want Kriquette to be the first to answer on this one because she does a lot of work in the community, and so does Buddy G. But the question is, how do you think the community sees child abuse? And this is going to be very important because the way the community sees it is the way it gets handled, and depending on where you're at.
So I think the community likes to believe that they think they know it's a public health issue. I think they like to pat themselves on the back and say, yeah, we know that's a problem. But I know from experience in talking to other nonprofits and other groups and stuff, people just don't want to talk about it and they don't want to admit it. And it's the same thing with human trafficking. It's like, oh, that doesn't happen here. And you would think after all the education that we bring forth and all the things that we do, that people would understand how bad it is. And they don't. Every time I go talk somewhere and I start throwing out statistics with good information behind the statistics, people are like, really? And I'm like, yes. And that's just reported cases of abuse. I mean, there's so much more going on. And I think the people that are in the arena that we're all in are educated and understand. But until it happens to someone in their group, I think the public awareness is just not there. And then all of a sudden something happens. But then I think it still stays isolated because there is so much still shame and things around child abuse that people are not, it's hard. It's really hard for people to step forward and talk about that. And so I think our folks still like to kind of cover their eyes and not deal with it. I mean, it's better than it was, but it's still, it's like if I share a personal story, you can still see people cringe. And I know they don't mean to, but it's a difficult thing. And people tend to gravitate away from difficult discussions. And if our communities would let themselves be better educated about it, the problem would not be nearly as big as what it is.
I think there's also a fair amount of rationalization. That's just the way Uncle whoever is. He's always been weird, just stay away. That just, I guess it just happens in that family, or it could never happen in our family. We're Christian. I see it maybe even more, that kind of rationalization, in things that I consider physical abuse that others do not, because in our community, it's okay to hit your children. It's a matter of degree to when it gets to where it's not okay to hit your children. Well, despite all the research and evidence that hitting children does not teach them good behavior, it doesn't stop bad behavior, it aggravates bad behavior, it causes lots of other problems. But I think we provide this education. Some folks take us up on it and take it to heart and maybe change their behavior accordingly and more actively protect children. Other people prefer not to hear it. And we are, I think, in some ways hindered by the fact that we can't put children's faces on a public service announcement. I don't know how many rescue these animals ads I have seen, and please donate to save cancer victims or sickle cell victims or multiple sclerosis victims. It's like, Folks do not appreciate that this public health issue is so much larger. So many more children are involved, and we don't have a good way to make that argument to the public because we cannot, and understandably, cannot put a child's face on it.
Absolutely. And if we talk about it, it means there's a problem. And I think that's kind of, you know, if we bring this topic to our group, it must mean that our group has a problem. And that's where people shy away from it. And that's really what I've noticed about some of the folks when I start the conversation. You know, that's when I notice they start, you know, kind of going backwards. You know, and I say, that's okay, because I'm comfortable talking about it. So let me sing it from the rooftops for you. And then you just listen to my song for a little bit, and then let's see how you think about it for a minute or two, and then we'll kind of weave it into the conversation a little bit more. And I think that when we start the conversation by saying, when we talk about boundaries and consent, when we talk about safety and security, boundaries and consent, and letting our children know that we are safe and secure, and we're creating an environment and a culture and a community of safety and security for you, then what we are doing is we are creating this entire community where those who do the abusing, those who are perpetrators, are going to say, there's no room at the table for me. And because when it gets talked about, and then it gets monitored, and then the children will start being more comfortable talking about it, more so than the adults. And that will allow more conversation and grow the conversation, like that ripple in the pond effect, that will also then say to the perpetrators, there's no space for you here. And I think that's when those that still have that feeling of that secrecy, I'm stealing Brene Brown's words, secrecy, silence, and shame, that's when that will start to dissipate a little bit. But that's what we have, is we have this culture where it's all about secrecy, silence, and shame, and hide it under the blankets. And I was in a training yesterday or the day before, and someone said, I am from this family that we have swept so much under the rug that our rugs are lumpy now, and we trip over everything. And that is what the issue of child abuse, child sexual abuse, and child exploitation and trafficking is. It has made the rug so lumpy. So we have to get really comfortable singing our songs from the rooftop so that people can hear it loud and clear, and get people comfortable with the song.
So I had a doctor once ask me, why would you ever talk about that? Which I was talking about child sexual abuse and how pervasive it was, and how, you know, corrosive. And he asked me, and I was at a luncheon, you know, with a bunch of doctors. I said, if we don't talk, we're the grown-ups. We can talk about anything. And if we choose not to talk about it, it gives the groomers more power. I mean, they hate it. When I put these three organizations in the same sentence, Penn State University, the gymnastic women's Olympic team, and the Catholic Church and the Boy Scouts of America, what comes to mind? I mean, those are not bad organizations. But what happened to all four of those organizations? I mean, do you want to be on an organization that serves children on the board of directors and then get sued because you were on a board of directors of an organization that allowed this to go on without anybody talking about it? I'm not going to be on the board of directors of any organization that doesn't have a formal written policy like the one that the CDC suggests. I was on a number of boards of directors of youth serving organizations. Believe it, as a pediatrician, you get asked to do that all the time, and I love it. the girls choir, South Florida, I love it. But the first thing I did when I got to the first meeting is like, what's our policy on preventing child sexual abuse? Because that's what the pedophiles are going to show up there too. So, and when I say that out loud, it's like everyone gets upset, but I'm like, well, you're on the board of directors. You have liability. All right. Let's just put it, there's your wallet. Here's your checkbook. How many zeros do you want to write on the check? And they get that. They're like, okay, what do we do? And I just, okay, there's a couple model policies that you can use. And then it's out there. Like we are, our policy is we do not allow adults to use our organization to gain access to children, period. That means there's no one-on-one lessons for anybody claiming to be a member of the master chorale. I give private lessons in my home. No, you don't. You don't use our name to do that. All right. You can do that on your own, but don't say you're a member of our organization and do it. So these are the things that the pedophiles and the groomers are going to use to gain access. And we are smarter than them. We really are. It's like we are collectively, we've seen this play before, and we do not have to go down the same path as before. And I think if the adults are comfortable talking about it, the secrecy is gone and the shame is gone, because it's not the kid's fault. Like, hello, there's no shame in being a child sexual abuse. Of course there is, because that's what the groomer has put in there, but that's really just psychological abuse. And ultimately, so we can head that off at the pass. That's not the child's fault, So, and I feel really good talking to people about it. I don't get invited to a lot of parties. So, I had two answers to this question. The first one was, what does the community think? It's a nuisance. It's someone else's problem. Or they subsume it all into child sexual abuse, and they say, well, you can't really know because people lie about that to get cut, blah, blah, blah. And so then they rationalize dismissing it. So that was my cynical brain saying that. But my real brain, my real experience is out in the community. When I say I work at Teddy Bear, I get the biggest thank yous and hugs from people. And Greenville, this community, very much supports Teddy Bear, and it's just been amazing. So I'm going to get verklempt here because it's so much support. It's amazing. So I can tell you that's my real experience. My cynical brain experience said something else, but I don't believe that. I think there's so many good people, and you tell them what you do and they're like, thank you and everything. So I get tired of hearing it, but I love working here. I know Bonnie Jean does, I know Ian does too. So anyway, I will zip it again.
Well, John, and to piggyback on that, and to let you know, we have trained, we have met our goal for training of over 1,800 people this year already. So people are, signing up for these trainings, and we have another one coming up on May 10th. So if people are interested in signing up for the public trainings.
Yeah, I don't know what the tipping point was, but it's in the rear view mirror, whatever it was.
We get excited about it.
Yeah.
So we love training people and offering these trainings. And we are starting another training called Beyond Stewards of Children, which we are piloting for Darkness to Light right now. So it is something that we're really excited about. And we are excited when people say, yes, we do want to hear more about it. And Pitt County and beyond are starting to get really excited about it. And John, I'll invite you to a party. You're all right. I'll invite you to a party.
Blame it on COVID. Let's blame it on COVID.
I do want to say something really quickly, because I was fortunate enough to work some with the Teddy Bear Clinic, and I think we sent a child from the wire there, and I think if we had a Teddy Bear Clinic in our community that was working with some intentionality around it, and we have a group of folks that are working towards that way. But I think that's what has really helped you guys, because everybody knows who the Teddy Bear Clinic is. I mean, that you ask folks around here, they know what it is. And I really think if we had them in more communities, because it's not like, oh, well, there's a child abuse clinic somewhere. It's like, oh, there's the Teddy Bear Clinic. So that's the difference in what you guys have created, and the safety that you have extended to your community. And I think communities like ours that would have something like that, I think that that would change things. Because now, like, there's all these different agencies helping, and everybody collaborates well, but there's no, like, I'm trying to think of a way to say this. So you guys are like the saviors, really, like, because we talk, and I talk with law enforcement a lot of time, and they're like, what we wouldn't give to have a teddy bear clinic in our community so that we could properly take care of these children. And not that they're doing it improperly, but there's just more steps because we don't have access to that. And so I really truly think that communities that have programs like yours are up here. And I think the communities that can get something like Teddy Bear Clinic will rise to that level. But when you're in a situation where everybody's trying to talk about it a little bit, but we don't have a go-to, I think it just makes a big difference.
It is absolutely possible. In my 15 years at Teddy Bear, Onslow has a CAC, Nash Edgecombe Wilson has a CAC now. There are two even newer centers south and east of us. So it's absolutely possible. And Teddy Bear and ECU has helped facilitate the development of some of those. And there's another agency, South Mountain, that's facilitated the development of others. But if your community is serious about it, it is absolutely possible.
Well, and I think,
and if you want to know who to
one,
talk to about it, Bonnie Jean will give you his contact information.
I think Kriquette is referring to the fact that her area is I think Kriquette is in the area where we may be looking to expand. So I think she is.
Oh, well, there's that possibility too.
Yeah. So I think she
but I just haven't heard anything about the timeline of that. So I'm not saying anything out loud about that.
Well, just make sure y'all let me know, because I want to be a part.
So thank you so much for answering that question. I know I'm a moderator, but I'm going to weigh in on this because this is my favorite question that I developed. And I've got great jokes. So well, what I'm coming from is when I talk about child abuse, I'm obviously talking about child sexual abuse or child sexual exploitation, commercial sexual exploitation of children. And when you present it in those terms, people are like, that's terrible. Of course not. But then when I say, well, what I'm also talking about is that 15-year-old who may have a substance use disorder and who you probably have looked at in a negative light, who may go in and out of juvenile systems. So what I'm faced with, and this is just in my work at what I do, so not as a whole for child abuse in general, but it's actually kind of breaking down that social understanding of what somebody thinks is right and what the judgment that they have attached to certain things that they see out in the community. So I did want to say that, not as a moderator, as a panelist, but I'm not one. So so that's what I kind of see, but at the same
we'll
time,
vote to promote you to that excellent comment.
But thank you, that means a lot. But I just did want to keep that just bring that up because I oftentimes deal with talking about juveniles who've been in and out of the system and not being seen in a victim way, but seen as perpetrators constantly. So
Madam Moderator, Madam Moderator, may I also add a piece about that? Because something else that's been coming up in conversation, and the other piece for this is that oftentimes now, and again, due to technology, what is now happening is that minors specifically are recruiting other minors and exploiting each other. They're exploiting each other for financial gain. and themselves for financial gain, so that there is now no longer the public perception out there is like that there's some type of pimp, so to speak. And it is actually that it is the technology and the access to the technology that the children are doing this on their own. With the help of their peers or a group of individuals who are teaching them how to do this. And so that now they are being presented as being their own perpetrators at this point, and unknowingly just thinking that they're making themselves a quick buck. And so this is a problem that is coming out more and more, and the education is really the key. The parental education, the parental controls, the understanding of how damaging the access to this technology can be, and knowing how to control this technology when we don't understand the technology as the adults, I think is really a piece of this as well. And I noticed that there were a couple of questions that came up in the chat box here as well, in terms of, how do we educate? Because I know Anne talked about, the physical abuse piece that, specifically in Eastern North Carolina, where parents, when I moved to Eastern North Carolina, the first thing I said was, I'm a little uncomfortable when I was working in an elementary school. I'm a little uncomfortable with this particular parent. I talked to one of my administrators. I said, this particular parent, told me they were going to whoop their child, and I'm not comfortable with it. And the administrator's response was, welcome to North Carolina. And I said, I'm not okay with that. And someone put in the chat box about, well, how do we educate parents about that? And we do have some parenting classes that we offer called Circle Security Parenting. It's not Triple P. It's a great precursor or scaffolding to Triple P. Triple P is also a wonderful parenting program that Pitt County offers, and well beyond Pitt County, a number of different counties offer Triple P as well. And that does not promote hitting as well. But Circle Security Parenting is also a parenting approach that talks about attachment and how we learn to understand our child's behavior and how to react and respond to our child's behavior by reflecting on their needs and meeting our child's needs through being bigger, stronger, kinder, and wise versus being mean or weak. And that does not include hitting. And so these are things that we work to show parents as part of prevention. And when we use prevention in any way, shape, or form, when we use education to prevent, we are also preventing exploitation of children in many ways. We are preventing the exploitation. We're preventing sexual exploitation. We need to make sure that we understand that when we are preventing, when we are educating, we are preventing. And that's another piece I just wanted to just kind of throw out.
Well, Bonnie Jean, first of all, thank you so much. And you've given me a great segue into my next question.
Before you move on,
yes,
can I share one more resource for the
absolutely.
person or people who are concerned about how do we reach those folks who say that their faith supports hitting children? There's a individual, Victor Vieth, V-I-E-T-H, who has written a series of articles specifically on that subject and how to interact with families and communities who are all about spare the rod, spoil the child. He currently is involved with the Zero Abuse Project, no hit zone sort of things, but his series of articles specifically related to faith were very reassuring and very informative. I mean, there are those folks who say that, you can find anything to support your argument in the Bible, and and he's able to do some of that. So if you're looking for sort of a framework to start with, you might look at those articles. They're several years old. He may have written something else more recently, but I was very impressed with those when I discovered them.
Thank you. I'm probably going to ask you for the links to send out in the follow-up, but that's neither here nor there. We have 5 minutes and I'll email you about that.
I'll see if I can put it in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So the last question that we are going to be able to get to today due to time that I have, and I think the panelists have already asked the questions in the chat. So, and this is going to be my fave and Bonnie Jean's fave, because we're segueing right into prevention. I don't even have to be here right now, but what are the best strategies to preventing child abuse? Anybody who wants to knock that one out, by all means, go for it.
I think if we really look at attachment and can assess, wanted babies who are, people are planning to have their child and they are a little more secure, that are less likely to be abused, and parents need to have some reflective functioning. I mean, there's ways to look at parental reflective functioning and say, how can you protect the baby? And starts in early childhood, the bonding. So, but you can be improved, and parenting skills they should be honored. I mean, I think that they should be better parenting programs. And I love the no-hit zone. I wish we could establish a no-hit zone somewhere and really have that discussion, because I think people actually had the discussion and really a free exchange of information about what works, what doesn't work. There's thousands of studies showing that corporal discipline is harmful. There's not a single study showing it is beneficial, but people don't believe in studies. I mean, they don't, there's still a majority of North Carolinian parents who endorse spanking their child. And then the question is, like, if you're going to let your boyfriends or your non-relative caregivers spank the child, that is the pathway to sexual abuse, because that's just an assault. And many child sexual abusers will take advantage of that and escalate the touching. So I just wanted to plant that idea into the public's mind that this is your job to protect and nurture your baby, and we want to help you. The pediatricians want to help you, the healthcare community, the mental health community, and all of society wants you to succeed as a parent. That's a no-brainer. And I'm buoyed with the fact that Bonnie Jean is getting out there and Kia and training so many citizens to help each other, because you're not alone. And you can be having some hard times, but we are a social animal. So, and we have a voice and a brain for a reason. So we need to use both of those, right? And eyeballs and everything, all our skills. Anyway, but I think that there's a lot of effective things that can be done. And just being part of a community and allowing people to ask for help without shame is super good. So that's all I'm going to say.
I think we just need to let everybody sing the song and encourage everybody to sing the song, as Bonnie Jean says, and to not be freaked out about it, and to do what everybody on the panel is already doing, and what probably a lot of you in the audience are doing, which is not cringing when the subject comes up, to answer calmly with some compassion, without ridicule or criticism. And John apparently gets a lot of compliments on the work that we do when people learn what he does. I don't know whether it's my face or what. I get a lot of, oh, that must be so hard. So my sort of go-to response is, but people are interested in protecting this child, and I have the opportunity to be a small part of that. And we all want our children to be safe and healthy. So we all have to find whatever our verse of the song is. and sing out, whether it's at the grocery store line or in a formal setting like this or wherever we find ourselves.
I agree. And to have the opportunity to collaborate and do it as a chorus. John and I call it putting the band back together again. We love that. And to have Kriquette, Kriquette put in the chat box, hey, I'd love to train with you when we get it's like having the Beatles, the Fab Four, we get out there and we sing and people start singing with us. Then it becomes a tune that everybody dances to, and it becomes one of those things that everybody starts listening to and everybody starts going, wow, we can talk about boundaries, we can talk about consent, and we dig it and we understand it. And you know what? Then people aren't feeling that shame. People are starting to talk about it. And so I really honestly believe that we can flip that switch and have people say, you know what? We're not talking about telling you how to raise your children. We're not talking about saying, it's okay to have sex. We're not talking about anything like that. We're talking about here's how we can build stronger relationships with our children and protect them, how you can protect them so that you are the significant adult in your child's life. And when parents realize that we're saying, here's how you can be the superhero in your child's life, and you already are, it's just going to make you that much stronger. Parents really start appreciating it. So, that's how we're going to do it. That's how we're going to be successful. So I'm happy to be a part of this band. Thanks so much.
I think just one small thing, something that I like to use that is a good visual for folks when I'm talking about child abuse and education and how that's so important and preventing child abuse, because people think it's this magic potion that we sprinkle about and we help prevent child abuse and all these sort of things. And, I come back to, remember when I was growing up and you were growing up and we rode our bikes with no helmets and, kids would hurt themselves and hurt their heads really bad. And, oh yeah, we got bike helmets to protect our kids' heads. This is no different. And it's like a light bulb goes off for folks because I think they see it. It's like, that's just, I don't understand it. I don't know it. So this is just too much. But when I simplify it for them and say, kids were getting hurt, they were having head injuries, we got bike helmets on these kids and started protecting them, that's no different than protecting them from abuse.
So I like how you put that, Kriquette. I really do. We are about 3 minutes over. We did have a last question that if you could answer real quick, that would be great. Maybe I'm not the greatest moderator on the planet, but I want this question to be answered. So as adults, how do we respond when a child discloses abuse? Like if they disclose abuse to you, what's the best response to that child is the question to clarify. Or if they never disclose the abuse at all, but what's going on. So I'm gonna let somebody answer that with the best they can.
I think the first one's easier because you just have to remain calm and tell them that you believe them and don't promise them anything except that you are going to support them, that you can make that promise that you will be there for them. And they knew that anyway because they decided to tell you. So those are the only promises that you can make, because the system, the system, it's an adversarial system involving the courts, and it's nothing easy about it. It was designed by engineers or attorneys or somebody that really wanted to make it as complicated as possible to protect children. But and if they never do, if you really feel something's going on and you have a good feeling, I mean, not a good feeling, you have a bad feeling, then you just have to keep the door open and support them, still support them. And disclosure of child sexual abuse particularly is difficult mean, Nancy Kellogg showed that the average child does not, it takes 6 years from the first event until they decide it's okay to disclose. And some you can't, and she only factored in children who disclose in childhood, because there's a big number that don't ever disclose in childhood. But you can't, if you put infinity in the denominator, you're going to have, so that you won't have an average. So there's a big bunch of taboos about disclosing. And I think those are even stronger for male victims, even stronger. We have not had a male Me Too movement. And I can talk to you about male sexually exploited children. We had one that was exploited by a babysitter, and I'm sure he's a star of some dark web porn site somewhere. And he would not even give us a urine. He was so uncooperative. But and his mother was unfortunately pretty clueless until she finally figured out what was going on. And this babysitter was going to abduct him and take him to another state. He could have been a missing child, like very easily. You see stories, you see things like this, and you're like, wow, I fear for so many children because of the online sexual predation that is a huge problem. In New Zealand, they have a commercial on television about these porn stars that come knocking on the door and ask the parents, could I talk to your 11-year-old? And it's a great ad. And I wish we had ads like that in the United States, because the people need to realize the pervasive corrosive effect of pornography on young minds. It's just a terrible thing. But I'll leave it at that. To answer your question was, I remain calm and tell them you absolutely believe them, and and the only thing you can promise to give them is your support. Did anybody else have anything else to say?
Well, you need
Not
to
your
make a
fault.
report. You need to
Sorry,
make a
Ann.
report to DSS. And in either of those situations,
Yeah, that's true. Sorry.
I personally think that I would be inclined to make some effort for the child who disclosed to me to find a way for them to be safe in that moment. And I have, if this happens while I'm at home, I have no legal standing other than as a citizen, I'm bound to report. But I would really struggle if I knew that kid was going to have to go home. And that home was where the abuse happened. So I don't know what the official legal answer to that is, but as a human who had a child trust me enough to talk to me, I think I'd have to come up with, well, we're going to bake cookies, or we're going to do something that's going to keep you here at my house long enough for somebody to get the ball rolling who does have legal authority to make sure that the child is safe.
Yeah, I just would add to, outside of telling the child that you believe them, it's really important that they know how brave they are for sharing that, because it's such a, and I didn't share mine until I was an adult, and it's such a big step for somebody, and they need to know that they're believed, but they also need to know that, oh my goodness, that was incredibly brave of you to share that with me. And I've had children disclose over my years at the Y, and just the trust that comes from those two things, I believe you, and you are being so brave, is just incredible. And so I always try to make that point so that people think about that part too, because it is, no matter if you're 3 or 43, it takes an incredible amount of courage to step forward and disclose that.
And just to piggyback on that, I believe you. Thank you for being so brave. And it's not your fault. No matter what anybody says, it's not your fault. And allowing for that silence, you know, let the forensic interviewers ask the questions. You don't want to be asking questions. And that's so important, because children will interpret your questions based on your facial expressions, based on your tone of voice, and they will try to interpret your questions, and that will taint what will happen with law enforcement. And so please, leave that to the experts. Please don't dig. Please, I'm just going to tell you that now. Just let their story unfold. It's okay to say, tell me more, but leave it at that. Let the silence allow the child to tell the story as it is their story. But please don't play armchair therapist. Don't play Monday morning quarterback. Just allow for the silence and be supportive through the silence in a caring, supportive way, and make the call. Make the call as soon as whatever the law says, make the call as soon as possible. As soon as possible, because once a child lets that out of their mouth, they are waiting for the other shoe to drop. They are waiting for the next step to happen, regardless of what the law says, which says, you know, you have X number of hours. But if you wait, you are allowing for a huge quantity of time for that child to also wait. And you don't want that. That's not healthy for the child.
That's an excellent point. I just want to say one or two more things. What we also don't want you to try and record it on your phone or anything like that. This is a do not do. But you can make a log later when the child's not there anymore, and you can write down, you know, what was said. And don't ask any questions. Just listen. Don't ask any questions. Do not try to be an armchair investigator, and don't try to make a case for anybody. Just let it happen. Listen, support the child, say, I'll be there. I'll be there to help you and support you. And you were very brave. I think I can't offer anything else.
And no comments about how serious this is and somebody could get in trouble. That is not the child's fault. It's not the child's responsibility.
Yeah, it's not helpful. They're already worried about the
Right.
adults becoming violent, and they may have already witnessed some violence. So don't,
Right.
you know, frighten them.
It can be a very uncomfortable place to be as an adult, especially if you happen to be related to the child who's disclosing to you, or related to, or in some way know the person who's alleged to have done something. But this is a chance for the child to speak, and be thankful that the child is able to speak. You may not be thankful in the moment that the child chose you to speak to, but it truly is a blessing for the child that they were able to speak. So do them the courtesy and offer them the respect of listening to what they have to say, not making promises you can't keep, and in no way placing conditions on what they've had to say.
So that's going to conclude the panel. We have run slap out of time. We're in time debt right now. So I'm going to say thank you to each one of our panelists for coming and talking today. I'm so glad you were here. There's some great feedback in the chat. I'm going to be sending out a follow-up email. We have this recording, so I'll be sending a link to the recording in case anybody wants to, revisit the material we went over. And if anybody has anything else to say, by all means say it, but that is going to conclude the panel.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
for
everybody.
having us.
Good effort. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
y'all.
you.
Have a
Y'all
good
have a
day.
great afternoon.
Bye now.